The Balkan nation of Serbia is a flashpoint in Europe's struggle between democracy and autocratic leaders. Russia's war in Ukraine heightens Serbia's importance as it resists Western pressure to join sanctions on Russia. Now the nation is being torn apart by protests accusing the government of authoritarian President Aleksandar Vučić, who's a strong Putin ally, of widespread voter fraud in last month's elections. Ali Rogin has more.
In central Belgrade, chants of "Vučić, you are a thief," more than 2 weeks after what protesters say was a stolen election. Vučić declared a sweeping mandate for his Serbian Progressive Party following wins in parliamentary and local elections that he called ahead of schedule. But international observers say Vučić's ruling party dominates Serbian media coverage and intimidates independent journalists, giving him an unfair advantage. On election day, there were reports of violence, ballot stuffing, and allegations of people getting bussed into different cities to vote. Since the vote, protesters have amassed in Belgrade, demanding the results be annulled. They've paused for Orthodox Serbian holidays, but will likely resume in mid-January.
People are on the street, dissatisfied with the election theft, which is obvious. Everyone confirmed it. There has been a serious disruption of the electoral process, and that is why the elections have to be repeated.
Opposition coalition leader Marinka Tepic has been on a hunger strike since the election. She addressed the crowds on December 30th, just before she was hospitalized.
I'm sorry that I can't say much. The only thing I can say is that I have already said everything, and that these elections must be annulled.
Vučić has defended the results. He and Russia say the protests were being controlled by the West.
We want to steer our own politics here. We don't mind paying the price for all the rubbish and lies, because we know what the cost is. The election process will be concluded by the institutions of the Republic of Serbia.
For more on the implications of these election results, I'm joined by Edward P. Joseph. He teaches at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and served for a dozen years in the Balkans, including with the U.S. Army. He has observed and organized numerous elections in the region. Edward, thank you so much for being here. First of all, can you tell us a little bit about what sort of leader Aleksandar Vučić has been, both internally within Serbia and with regard to other countries?
President Vučić is the classic autocratic leader. He's attempting to establish thorough control of Serbia with a veneer of democracy, and that's what we see in these recent elections. This is what is known as illiberal democracy. His neighbor and his mentor and patron within the EU, of course, is Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary. And Orban set the model for this, where there's a veneer of democracy where you hold elections, but the elections are actually meaningless because the ruling party has such dominance over the media landscape. The opposition is weakened. The media are hugely dominated by the ruling party, and independent journalists, activists are intimidated. And that's what we've seen in Serbia.
And there was nothing requiring these elections to be held at this time. So why did he call for these elections at this time?
Well, that's exactly right. These are, again, early elections. And the best explanation for them is that President Vučić, as a result, in large part, mistaken U.S. policy by the Biden administration, was in a crisis in late September. There was a shocking confrontation in the north of Kosovo. This is where NATO troops, including U.S. troops, are deployed. And there was this Kosovo police patrol happened upon a Serb militia group, heavily armed, that could not have entered into Kosovo without Serbian authorities knowing. And of course, that immediately cast suspicion on President Vučić himself. And this attack, which led to a shootout in the north, killing a Kosovo police officer and 3 Serbs, was a huge shock, because it showed, in fact, that the U.S. policy of trying to supplicate, placate President Vučić and somehow bring him over from a autocratic, pro-Hungary, pro-Russia orientation had failed. It was that crisis, very likely, that President Vučić wanted to put behind him, reestablish his authority as the sole preeminent political figure in Serbia and move forward. But it turns out that that is not going to be quite as simple as he thought.
So let's talk a little bit more about U.S. policy towards Serbia and the different priorities that the United States is balancing. How have they approached Aleksandar Vučić? What do you make of their response to this crisis?
I would say this about U.S. policy, which has, brought us to this brink. President Biden has gotten the Balkans right. Consistently. President Biden himself understands the region, and he set off his administration with the words that we are in a challenge of democracy versus autocracy. So President Biden has gotten it right, but his administration has gotten it completely wrong. They've abandoned that. So we have a disparity in the Balkans where the United States treats Serbia's neighbors to a much harsher, higher standard. And I should point out we've had two violent confrontations in Kosovo this year. We've had potential issues in Montenegro, which is a NATO ally, and now within the government there are pro-Russian elements within that NATO ally. And we have a brewing crisis, possibly even beginning this month in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So this is the mistake of the Biden administration, has been to treat President Vučić to this different, softer standard on the belief that somehow we can bring him over. Instead, what it has done is it has projected fear. The U.S. basically projecting fear of Belgrade, which President Vučić correctly interprets as weakness and takes advantage. And this all goes, of course, to the benefit of his ally, which is Russia.
Sure, and let's talk a little bit more about Russia. How does this affect his relationships with Putin?
Well, we see clearly that Russia and Serbia are aligned. So we have this, what is called a balance, but in fact, the truth is a pro-Russian policy in Belgrade, and we see this openly now. So we have the absurdity of the United States, which continues to cater to President Vučić, and we have the absurdity where President Vučić is meeting with his close and favorite ambassador, the Russian ambassador, and the two of them are openly blaming the United States and the European Union for fomenting these protests in Serbia, which are legitimate protests. These are protests by the opposition, by democracy activists who believe, and with good reason, that the election, particularly in the capital, Belgrade, has been stolen from them. And again, we see in the communication of the United States, particularly the U.S. Embassy in Belgrade, this posture of avoiding the principles, the very principles that President Biden stated are at the foundation of his administration. And instead of sticking to our principles, we again project fear, which Vučić interprets as weakness. And for an administration that's in its own election year this year, this portends very badly.
Fascinating stuff. Edward Joseph with the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, thank you so much for breaking this down for us.
You're welcome.